Europeans were just sort of blown away by what they saw. They come there expecting to find native people maybe scrapping out a living. And you're struck instantly about how is this possible?
Beneath Easter Island's famous stone giants lies a hidden world that most people will never know exists. Miles of dark, twisting underground corridors, shaped by ancient volcanoes, walked by people for over 1,000 years, and wrapped in legends that have terrified the islanders for centuries. Researchers have barely scratched the surface of what's down there. Some passages haven't seen human footsteps in generations, and some of what was hidden inside them has never been found. Born in fire, the stone, giants didn't come first. Before the first moai was ever raised, before the first canoe touched the black sand shores, long before any human being set foot on this island, Rapa Nui was already building its secrets underground. Easter Island sits in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, roughly 3,700 kilometers west of Chile, and 2,075 kilometers east of Pitcairn Island, the nearest inhabited land. One of the most isolated places on Earth, a triangular sliver of volcanic rock, covering just 163 square kilometers, battered by ocean winds on every side. Rapa Nui was not born gently, it was forged. The island erupted from a volcanic hotspot in the ocean floor, beginning approximately 3 million years ago. 3 ancient shield volcanoes, Taravaca in the north, Poik in the east, and Rano Kau in the southwest, form the island's 3 corners. Taravaca is the tallest, reaching 507 meters above sea level. These were not explosive volcanoes, they were effusive, meaning they poured out vast rivers of flowing basaltic lava that spread slowly across the landscape, cooling and hardening into the ground people walk on today. Now, pay attention here, because this is the part nobody explains. When lava flows, the outer skin cools and hardens first. Underneath, molten rock keeps moving. When the eruption eventually stops and the lava drains away, what's left is a hollow tube, nature's own tunnel, a corridor carved by fire itself, running silently beneath. On the surface, these structures are called lava tubes, and Rapa Nui is riddled with them. The island's entire underground is honeycombed with these ancient channels, passages, chambers, corridors, preserved beneath the thin skin of soil and grass that islanders have always walked on. You could stand in the middle of Easter Island right now, with moai all around you, and have absolutely no idea that just meters below your feet lies a vast, branching, interconnected underground world. That world has been there since before the island had a name. And here's what nobody talks about. It has never been fully mapped. Subscribe now if you want to understand what's actually down there, and what the island's own people believe is still hiding in those tunnels. Because what comes next is the part the guidebooks don't mention. Into the dark. What the caves actually look like. The lava tube systems of Rapa Nui are not uniform. Some passages are barely wide enough to crawl through. Others open into cathedral-like chambers with high arching ceilings, where the rock walls preserve the frozen ripple marks of ancient flowing lava. Some tubes run horizontally for hundreds of meters. Others drop at sharp angles into chambers that modern researchers have never fully explored. And this is where it gets strange. The most documented cave system on the island is Ana Te Pahu, located on the slopes of the Rano Kau volcano, near the ceremonial village of Orongo. What makes Ana Te Pahu unusual, and what explains why it was used continuously for centuries, is that it contains a freshwater source. On an island with no rivers or streams, that is not a minor detail, that is survival. Banana plants grow inside its entrance, fed by the cool filtered light above. Researchers who have entered its deeper passages describe the temperature drop as immediate, like crossing a threshold that wasn't there a moment before. But Ana Te Pahu is the welcoming face of what lies underground. Elsewhere, cave openings are far less inviting. Some are nothing more than narrow slits in the rock, easy to walk past entirely, dropping away into darkness that opens into chambers far larger than the entrance would ever suggest. Researchers who have pushed through those tight openings describe the same sensation: a sudden drop in temperature, an absence of sound from above, and the unsettling realization that the passage you crawled through looks entirely different when you turn around. And here's the deal. The volcanic rock of Rapa Nui is highly porous. Rainwater doesn't pool or form surface rivers. It seeps directly through the ground, filtering down through cracks, carving and widening passages over thousands of years, creating unexpected chambers and dead ends that follow no pattern a newcomer could anticipate. What volcanoes started, water continued to shape, slowly, invisibly, over millennia. Some of the passages that exist today were not there when the first Rapa Nui people arrived. The underground keeps changing on geological time, without anyone on the surface noticing. The Rapa Nui people have always said that getting lost down there is easy. Getting back is harder than you think. Experienced islanders will not enter certain passages alone, and they will not enter unfamiliar territory at all without knowing exactly where they are going and exactly why. Now think about what it means that most of these passages have never been entered by anyone with a research protocol and a way to mark the route out. Think about what might still be inside them. That question is about to get much more complicated. The living island, how the Rapa Nui people use the underground. The Rapa Nui people arrived on Easter Island somewhere between 300 and 900 CE, most likely navigating from the Marquesas Islands or the Society Islands in one of the greatest feats of open ocean navigation in human history. They found a forested island, rich in resources, and these dark openings in the earth, waiting. They did not ignore what they found, they moved into it. The most immediate use was practical. Above ground, Rapa Nui's climate is shaped by its total ocean exposure, strong winds, intense sun, periodic drought. The caves offered something the surface could not: stable temperature, shelter from wind, protection from rain. Archaeological evidence from volcanic island cultures across Polynesia consistently shows that caves served as refuges during environmental hardship or conflict. On Rapa Nui, that context matters enormously. But here's what nobody talks about. The island's history includes a brutal civil war. The conflict between the island's two primary population groups, the Hanau Ape and the Hanau Momoko, likely occurred during the 17th or 18th century. It was not a short dispute. It was a sustained period of raiding, resource destruction, and organized violence. During that kind of breakdown, a concealed underground passage is not a curiosity. It is a lifeline, a hiding places for people, for food, for objects that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. And this is where it gets darker. Beyond shelter and survival, there is the question of the dead. Archaeological investigation of caves across volcanic Pacific islands, Hawaii, the Marquesas, Tonga, consistently reveals evidence of burial practices. Caves were understood as liminal spaces, thresholds between the living world and the world of ancestors. On Rapa Nui, with its profound focus on ancestor veneration, the Moai themselves are believed to represent deified ancestors. It would be almost impossible for the underground not to have carried deep spiritual weight. Oral histories and limited survey work confirm that some caves were used for ritual purposes connected to death, ancestry, and passage into the spirit world. What makes this tantalizing is what has not been done. Many of Rapa Nui's cave systems have never been subject to rigorous archaeological survey. Some passages have not been entered in generations. The full underground network has never been comprehensively mapped. And one specific type of object, the most important object in Rapa Nui culture, is believed by oral tradition to still be hidden somewhere in those caves. We'll get to that. But first, you need to understand what the underground actually meant to the people who lived above it. Voices from underground, the legends and the terror. Here is where the air changes. The Rapa Nui spiritual tradition is layered and intense, shaped by centuries of isolation on a tiny island surrounded by an enormous ocean. In Rapa Nui cosmology, the world is not divided simply into living and dead. It is populated by spirits, ancestral presences, supernatural forces, beings that occupy the landscape alongside the living. The spirits most associated with the underground are the Aku-Aku. In Rapa Nui tradition, Aku-Aku are guardian spirits, ancestral forces bound to specific families, places, and objects of power. They are not uniformly benevolent. Some are protective, others are territorial, hostile to anyone who approaches without the correct knowledge or proper respect. The caves were their concentrated domain, understood not as empty spaces but as occupied ones, inhabited by presences you could not see but absolutely could feel. Now, pay attention here, because this is not superstition in the casual sense. This is a living legal system. Entering a cave without the appropriate prayers, the correct ritual approach, or the permission of those who held spiritual authority over that space, was considered genuinely dangerous. Not rude, dangerous. Illness could follow, misfortune. In the worst oral accounts, death. The ethnographer Alfred Métraux, who conducted extensive fieldwork on Rapa Nui in the 1930s, documented accounts of islanders who refused to enter specific caves under any circumstances, not out of fear of the physical dark, but out of a clearly held belief that what occupied those spaces would respond to intrusion. These prohibitions were maintained by the island's ritual specialists, the Rongorongo masters, the priests, the clan leaders who understood the underground as a spiritually charged territory that demanded the same respect you would give a chief's burial ground. And then there is mana. Mana is a force, a kind of spiritual authority or concentrated power that accumulates in objects, people, and places over time. The caves, as spaces where the boundary between the living and the ancestral was thinnest, were understood to be saturated with it. Entering the wrong cave without preparation wasn't trespassing on physical property. It was intruding on a concentration of force that could turn against you. The island's hereditary chiefs, the Ariki, who derived authority from direct descent from the founding ancestor Hotu Matua, were believed to carry concentrated mana that gave them special authority over spiritual territories. Certain caves were bound to specific Ariki lineages. When those lineages were disrupted by the catastrophes of the 18th and 19th centuries, knowledge of those caves, their locations, their contents, the protocols for entering them, was disrupted too. But here's the deal. The oral tradition also preserves something specific, something recoverable. Some cave names and associated stories hint at episodes of violence, conflict, and in some accounts, ritual practices during the island's most desperate periods of resource depletion and civil war. The Rapa Nui people preserved these stories deliberately. They associated them with specific underground locations. The caves held memory, and certain families held the keys. Those families used the caves as vaults. Island oral traditions speak explicitly of caves being used to store objects of extraordinary value. Rongorongo tablets inscribed with the island's undeciphered script, objects of ritual power, weapons, heirlooms hidden during periods of conflict. These caches were secret by design, known only to specific lineages, transmitted in oral form from generation to generation, not written down, not shared with outsiders. And when those lineages were shattered, by disease, by slave raids, by the catastrophic population collapse that the island endured in the 19th century, some of that knowledge simply vanished. And what happened to destroy those lineages is one of the most harrowing stories in the entire history of the Pacific. The erasure. When the knowledge died. In 1862 and 1863, Peruvian slave raiders descended on Easter Island. What followed was not a small incursion. It was a systematic abduction of an estimated 1,500 Rapa Nui people, roughly a third of the entire island's population, carried off to work in South American guano mines. Think about who was taken. The raiders specifically targeted people of authority and status, because those were the ones most visibly identifiable as leaders. They took elders, they took priests, they took the men and women who carried the oral tradition, who knew the cave locations, who held the spiritual protocols, who could read and inscribe the Rongorongo tablets. In a single raid, the knowledge infrastructure of an entire culture was seized and transported across an ocean. The Ariki, the hereditary chiefs who held authority over specific cave systems, and the Aku bound to them, were among those taken. The Rongorongo masters, the only people who could read the inscribed tablets and who knew where the uncatalogued ones were hidden, were among those taken. The elders who held the names and locations of family cave caches, gone. The entire living memory of the underground, embodied in specific people, was loaded onto ships and carried away. When a small number of survivors were eventually repatriated, after international pressure, years too late, they brought smallpox with them. It spread through the remaining population. By 1877, the indigenous population of Rapa Nui had fallen to approximately 111 people. 111. From a civilization that had built hundreds of multi-ton stone monuments, maintained a complex spiritual and political order, and navigated the largest ocean on Earth, to 111 survivors. Here's what that actually means for the caves. The people who knew which underground passages held the Rongorongo tablets were gone. The people who knew which chambers were burial sites for specific lineages were gone. The people who understood the aku-aku, protocols for specific cave systems, gone. The knowledge wasn't erased in one dramatic moment. It bled out slowly over decades of disease and dislocation, until what remained was fragments. Oral tradition passed down through fewer and fewer hands, some of it preserved, much of it simply lost. No one knows how much, and that is exactly why. What lies beneath Easter Island is still, in the most literal sense, undiscovered. Reading the walls, what archaeology has actually found now. Here is where you need to hear something clearly, because the internet is full of versions of this story that go in a different direction. There is no underground city beneath the Moai. There are no engineered tunnels connecting the stone figures to a hidden chamber. No ancient civilization-built infrastructure under Easter Island. The underground network is entirely natural, volcanic geology, not human engineering, and anyone who tells you otherwise is using the island's real mystery as wrapping paper for a fantasy. But here's the thing, that is not a disappointment. That is not the story getting smaller. That is the story getting real. What researchers have actually documented in Rapa Nui's cave systems is compelling on its own terms. Evidence of habitation, charcoal from fires, modified rock surfaces, traces of organic material, indicating extended use. Some caves show deliberate modification, winding entrances, smoothed floors, structural changes that go beyond what nature produces. These are not random shelters. They were prepared. The petroglyphs, the carved rock images found throughout the island, extend into some cave environments. Hundreds of petroglyph sites exist above ground, featuring the Birdman deity, Tangata Manu, marine creatures, and geometric forms. The same carving tradition appears in cave contexts, confirming that the underground was not separate from Rapa Nui's symbolic life. It was part of it. And then there is Rongorongo. Only around 24 objects bearing the Rongorongo script are known to exist in collections worldwide. 24 for an entire writing system. Every serious researcher who has worked on Rapa Nui has encountered the oral tradition that insists more tablets exist. Hidden in caves, placed there by people who knew what was coming and needed to protect the most. Sacred objects the culture possessed. To date, none have been recovered from underground contexts under controlled archaeological conditions. But the tradition does not fade. It is maintained by islanders whose family histories run directly through the underground network. And it hasn't been disproved, it simply hasn't been found. Here's what nobody talks about. The finding hasn't really been attempted, not systematically, not with community partnership, not with the resources the question deserves. The missing map. Why so much remains unknown. In the 21st century, with satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and LiDAR surveys that can map terrain down to centimeters of resolution, the underground of Easter Island is still substantially uncharted. This is not a technical problem. It is partly a legal and ethical one, and understanding it matters. Rapa Nui is a territory of Chile, but its indigenous community has fought consistently, and often successfully, for meaningful control over their cultural heritage. Access to archaeological sites, including cave systems, is governed by frameworks that give community members real authority over research conducted on their land. Some caves are considered sacred and are not available for outside investigation. Some families maintain private knowledge of specific underground locations and have chosen, reasonably, not to share that knowledge with researchers. These are not obstacles to understanding. They are expressions of sovereignty over a history that was taken, damaged, and catastrophically mismanaged for over a century after European contact. Now, pay attention here. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of sections of the island have confirmed the presence of void spaces beneath the surface. Hollow underground features consistent with lava tube networks. Geophysical surveys published in archaeological literature have identified subsurface anomalies consistent with cave systems in areas that have not been physically entered or documented. The surveys have not been comprehensive. They have confirmed that the underground system is real and extensive. They have not told us what is in it. Some caves known from oral tradition have never been formally located by researchers. Some passages entered informally, by curious visitors, by islanders exploring their own heritage, have not been documented in ways that enter the scientific record. The full extent of the network, its depth, its interconnections, its relationship to the ceremonial architecture above ground, remains unknown. And incomplete in the context of Rapa Nui's underground means that the most significant archaeological discovery still waiting to be made on this island may not be above the surface at all. The island beneath the island. Why this matters. Right now, Easter Island has been studied and written about since European contact in 1722. The Moai have been measured, dated, and analyzed with increasing precision. The mechanisms of how they were moved have been tested experimentally. The ecological collapse linked to deforestation has been documented and modeled. In many respects, the surface story of Rapa Nui is reasonably well understood. The underground story is not even close. And get this, the underground is not a separate story. It is the same story. The Aku Aku spirits associated with the caves are the same ancestral forces that the Moai were built to honor. The family treasures hidden in underground caches belong to the same lineages whose memory is preserved in the stone giants along the coast. The caves and the Moai are not two different chapters. They are one story told in two materials, one carved in stone and raised into the wind for anyone to see, one sealed in the dark beneath the earth, still waiting. What could a properly resourced, community-led investigation of Rapa Nui's cave systems reveal? The honest answer is that nobody knows. If Rongo tablets exist underground, their recovery would potentially transform our understanding of one of the world's only undeciphered writing systems. Material culture from the Civil War period, hidden deliberately, cached in specific family passages, sealed by the collapses of 1862 and 1877, could rewrite the ground-level history of the island's most turbulent era. The relationship between the underground landscape and the ceremonial architecture above could unlock aspects of Rapa Nui's spiritual cosmology that currently exist only as fragments in oral tradition. Here's what the legend seekers miss when they go looking for underground cities and secret megastructures. The real mystery is more profound than any of that. It is the mystery of a real culture in a real place that maintained a living relationship with a vast underground world for over 1,000 years, hiding its most precious objects there, burying its dead there, praying to its ancestors there, and that had most of its knowledge holders erased in a single decade of raids and disease. That knowledge is not entirely gone. Some of it was preserved. Some of it lives in families on the island right now. And some of it, almost certainly, is still sealed in passages beneath the grass, in chambers that have not been opened since the people who sealed them were taken away on ships they did not choose to board. What the dark knows, the truth that the island keeps. Let me be direct about what we actually know, and what makes this story genuinely terrifying if you're paying attention. Easter Island's underground network is real, vast, shaped by volcanic forces millions of years old, walked by people for over 1,000 years, used for shelter, ritual, burial, and hiding, associated with spiritual beliefs that gave it a living, dangerous presence in the minds of everyone who lived above it. And it remains right now incompletely mapped and incompletely understood. Not because the technology to investigate it doesn't exist, because much of the human knowledge that would make investigation meaningful, the oral tradition, the family lineages, the Aku Aku protocols, the specific locations passed down in whispers from elder to elder, was destroyed in a decade of raids and disease and forced displacement that the island never fully recovered from. There is no underground city. There are no engineered tunnels beneath the Moai. Anyone selling you that version is giving you a story, not a truth. But here's the deal. The truth doesn't need the embellishment. The truth is already extraordinary. A civilization sophisticated enough to carve and transport hundreds of multi-ton stone monuments maintained for centuries, an intimate relationship with a fire-formed underground labyrinth they believed was inhabited by ancestral spirits. They hid their most sacred objects in it. They buried their most important dead in it. They protected the knowledge of its passages with such its secrecy that when the people who held that knowledge were taken, most of that knowledge went with them. The caves still exist, unchanged, waiting. Much of what they contain has never been examined by anyone with the tools to understand what they are looking at. The island above has given up a great deal of its mystery over 3 centuries of study. The island below has given up almost nothing. Not one Rongorongo tablet has been recovered from an underground context. Not one sealed cache has been opened under archaeological supervision. Not one complete map of the lava tube network exists anywhere. Whatever is in those passages, whatever was hidden in the last days before the raids, whatever was sealed inside when the population collapsed to 111 survivors, whatever the Aku are still guarding in the volcanic dark. It has been there for a very long time, and it is not going anywhere. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who thinks they already understand. Easter Island, the surface has been studied for centuries. The underground has barely been touched. And the next chapter of this island story, the one that could change what we know about Rapa Nui's writing system, its history, its most desperate final years before contact shattered it, may not come from above the ground at all. It may come from beneath it, from those dark winding passages running under the feet of the silent stone giants in the most remote inhabited place on Earth, where something has been waiting in the volcanic silence for someone to finally come looking, and mean it. The island is still keeping its secrets buried deep below the surface. The real question now is whether anyone will go deep enough and be brave enough to find them.